Manager HQ's live event where we are interviewing product leaders about their product management experience. We have a Q&A today with Ilya Black, who is a product manager, consultant, and coach with 12 years experience. Previously, he's been director of product with two major companies, and we are so excited to have you, Ilya.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on.
Thank you so much. So, for those of you joining live, please feel free to post any questions in the chat feature, and we will have time to go over them towards the end of uh, the the live chat. So, thank you again, Ilya. My first question for you is, how did you get into product management? What was your journey like?
Yeah, so the background is I studied computer science and cognitive science at university and college. And I kind of I thought I should go into programming, but I think it was more of a should versus that I wanted to. And by the end of that time, I decided it wasn't really the right thing for me. I didn't really want to spend all my time programming, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then a few years later, I was visiting friends in New York, and I just overheard somebody talking about product, and then ended up kind of learning more about it and realized it was actually a really good fit for me because it was technical, but also you primarily work with people. You primarily work with how do people think, how do they interact with technology. So it was really a good marriage of the two things that I had studied and was interested in. And then I just applied to a lot of junior PM jobs in New York, and that's how I started.
Very interesting that you have a background in cognitive science. How has that helped you in terms of building products?
I mean, I think it's not just that I have a background in it, it's just something I'm still very interested in. So I'm always reading more about psych research, neuroscience research, like all this kind of stuff. And I do think it orients me as a PM to always think about people first. So I'm not necessarily so much driven by, oh, I want to work on fancy new technology, or really also not so much driven by the business side, I would say, but most primarily by people and how do people think? I'm really curious about that. I think this helps me always keep people first and think about what are the problems we're solving for them? How are they using this? What's their reaction? All of that.
Very important to keep in mind, especially when you're building products such as apps. And how did you decide that you wanted to start in consulting and advising startups?
I think it was kind of a long time coming in a way, because at some point I started to just feel that something about working full time isn't working for me. Whether it was just kind of a singular focus on only one idea and one product, or just the constraints of full time work and only being able to, just committing all my time to one company. I'm naturally a person who works on lots of projects and kind of always has multiple things going on. And I realized that work was the one place where I didn't have this kind of diversity. So yeah, eventually I just decided that I wanted to try it out. I mean, it was I really wasn't sure about it at all, because I think it's less common in product than many other fields. But so far it's worked out. It's worked better than I expected to be honest.
Very nice. And then how did you build your business acumen skills?
In terms of my own business as a freelancer, or more like product business and the product side or the business side of product?
Can we answer both?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's something I started off not thinking about too much, and I think it was I think the honest answer is it was kind of painful in the beginning, because I was so much focused on the user, and I think pretty focused on tech, just because I had a background in computer science, but I never studied finance. I never really had a background in marketing. So I think it was after a few kind of blows in my career that I realized, yeah, I can't just focus on this. My job as a PM is to grow the business through serving customers, through building something that customers want. But I had to kind of push myself to always make sure I'm balancing these two and kind of thinking of them together instead of separate things. And then as a freelancer, it's just been kind of fun, right? Because I think as a, I've never worked for myself. I'd never had my own startup or anything. So it's just been kind of exciting to see that everything I do has a direct impact on my own business, my own thing. So just that like immediate feedback loop has been pretty fun to have.
Very nice. And what does your typical day or week look like?
I mean, so these days it really changes a lot because there are some weeks where I have calls every day, and there are some weeks where I have maybe just a couple of calls throughout the week. And clients also kind of come and go, projects come and go. Um, Usually, it's majority of my work are calls with people, especially if I'm doing coaching. Then this primarily is calls, and otherwise, I also do a lot of facilitation. So a lot of times there will be like a few hours prepping for a workshop and making a Miro board or something, then running a workshop with the team, and then also summarizing results and putting them into a presentation or something like that. But the majority of it is on and off calls with different companies and different people.
And what are the major differences between you having a typical PM job and now consulting, besides like different projects?
I think there's a lot of different dynamics. So as a PM, you really have to build relationships within the company, right? And I think this is like one of the big challenges is you're so central usually to what's happening. You need to have relationships with almost everybody, or at least a certain group of people. Whereas in my job now, my relationships are always direct ones. They're the people that hired me or the people I'm coaching. But it's a little, in that way, it's a lot easier because I don't have to kind of constantly think about the sort of complicated web of people. It's more just, okay, I have to think about the people I'm working with directly. So that's one big difference. The other one that I was surprised by, but this is maybe something that like needs to change ultimately, but I realized that as a consultant, I was often getting people were listening to me more than they did when I was an in-house employee somehow. And I could kind of understand that because then you're kind of like paying this person to tell you something, so then you're going to listen to them closely. But yeah, it was an interesting. I didn't expect that because I've never consulted before. And most of the time now I'm working most of the time I'm working directly with founders because I'm mostly working with smaller startups. So it's also interesting that I'm now working directly with founders versus more like reporting to them, for example.
And what were some of the initial challenges you had when transitioning into consulting?
I mean, I never worked freelance before, so I just had no idea what to expect and no idea how to find clients. I got really lucky because a few companies I updated my LinkedIn and just a few companies started to trickle in. So I didn't really have to do any kind of like sales or like outreach myself. And then I got doubly lucky because there's another person in Berlin who was a product freelancer and he has recently decided to start his own thing. So he's been kind of sending his clients to me, like referring them to me, which I'm super grateful for because it's really helped me build up a steady stream of people.
And are you marketing now, or are you still using the same way of?
I made a website and I spent like a lot of time making it. And then I looked at the traffic and it was dismal. Like nobody's going to it. So I'm not sure. So no, the simple answer is no. I mean, things like this I consider marketing for myself, right? Because it's a way to get my voice in front of people. And I'm going to go to a conference soon in Poland, and I try to do things like this. But I talked to a lot of freelance PMs early on, or like not early on, but halfway through, basically, just to get their feedback. And it was interesting that some of them really have like a content machine going. Like they publish all the time. They have books, and maybe ultimately, like this is where I'll have to what I'll have to do. But there are other people who I talk to who have nothing. They're just like, yeah, clients just come to me, and I'm just taking it as it comes. I'm more on that side of things for now.
And I didn't mention earlier, you are currently in Berlin,
Yeah.
where we're interviewing you. So just wanted to put that out there. What are the principles or frameworks of product management that you find yourself often using when you're consulting?
So I often end up doing some version of a sprint with clients. And then I'm like I said, I do a lot of facilitation, but I'm always like kind of picking and choosing and recombining things. And so a lot of times, like I think with a lot of clients, it's sort of been like, okay, we want to kind of rethink our product strategy, or we don't have a product strategy, we want to create one. And then I'm always kind of like, then if that's what I hear, I'm always saying, okay, let's do this, but let's go back to like problems first and figure out like, make sure you understand your customers, whatever. And so often we end up doing design sprints to just kind of bring together all the disparate knowledge they have and understand what they know, what are the gaps, and try to create a strategy from that perspective. We're not doing the full sprint, so we're not actually like creating a solution and getting user feedback on this, but more the initial steps where you're just generating ideas and kind of like setting, like level setting within the company so that everyone has a rough understanding of the customers and the vision of the company in the same way.
And how often usually are you contracted with them? Do you help them all the way to launch?
Mm, So I've been consulting for about a year, a little bit over a year. And so far, it's just been really, really different. So there are some companies that I've worked with from an early stage, like exactly from before launch to actually like even help them craft a product. With other companies, it's been more coming in once they they've launched something, they've iterated, but they're not quite getting like the product market fit that they want to see. So they need some help rethinking and adjusting. Other companies are actually much more mature, but they maybe have some PMs that need coaching. So it really varies depending on the company. And I also, I do think that I also need to start thinking more about the type of work that I want to be doing and maybe trying to specialize a bit more in the type of consulting I do. For now, I don't do that. So I do a little bit of everything basically.
Do you have an idea of what specialization that you want to get into?
Good question. No, it's all really fun. Like I really enjoy coaching. I really enjoy working one-on-one with somebody and helping them develop. And this is something I did a lot as a director of product. So it's nice to have that continuity. But it is also really fun to be working with like early stage startups, working with the founders and helping them develop a product vision or refine it. I feel like what I'm starting to see is a common pattern where there are founders who are basically doing product. They haven't hired a product person yet, but they're basically making those decisions themselves. And they need somebody with experience to help them do this correctly, to like develop product thinking, essentially. I think a lot of times founders probably have like some innate understanding and they think in product-like ways, but they just don't have the hands-on experience. They don't know all of the common practices of how to approach things this way.
And you mentioned this part of it, but any other patterns or key tips that you've learned from advising any of the companies that you've advised?
So some of the patterns I've seen, I think they're not going to be surprising. I think they're all kind of cliches at this point, but like probably the number one thing I always see is lack of focus. Just, especially really at all stages, but I feel like I so often have now had the conversation of like, what's most important to you? Like, how can we help you figure out what's most important and really focus on this? Because you're not going to be able to solve all these problems at once and create like a really delightful and really like strong experience for your customers if you're trying to do all of this at once, So lack of focus, I see a lot. Another one I see quite often is just lack of like agile thinking. So definitely like companies that spend just lots of time internally debating and trying to make decisions and trying to make really good decisions and thinking that this is how they need to approach it. And then when I ask them sort of like, how often are you actually testing the things you're building? They're like, well, we don't, we just release them and then we move on to the next thing. So helping them shift their resources, their energy from all of that upfront debate and iteration to like, no, like just get the thing, of course, make good decisions, but like how can you get it out as soon as possible? And then how do you build a really good experimentation framework? Because you need, on one hand, this requires some technology to make sure you're doing A/B testing and you can do things like this. But even more than tech side, I think it requires the right kind of thinking, right? Always thinking experimentally, always thinking about how do you verify things, how do you learn more, versus just shipping something and moving on. I think that's another big point that I've had to spend a lot of time on. And I would say the third one is either just not having a product strategy or thinking they have one, but really what I would consider not having one, So like, often it's the typical thing where often, it's like a list of features or a list of ideas, but not like an aligned list of outcomes that they want to reach connected to user problems and things like that. So this I also see quite often.
Got it. I'm going to just answer some questions from the audience. What is one advice that you can give to someone who's looking to pivot from tech consulting to product management?
Just so I want to make sure I understand, is it pivoting from tech consulting and becoming a full-time PM, or is it consulting in tech to consulting in product?
Let's say just product in general.
Yeah, I mean, so I often get the question of like, how do you get into product? And I think this continues to be an elusive thing, because now there are boot camps, there are ways you can study product, but I think there's still not so many traditional paths for product. So usually to me, it's either you do it within a company, so you make a transition, you kind of express your interest. I've seen a lot of people do this internally, where they kind of start to gravitate towards product. Maybe they're an engineer, maybe they're a designer, maybe they're in marketing, but then they kind of start to take on some projects and then ultimately join the team. Or if they're trying to make that hop from one company to another, then I think it's just thinking about what have you done before where you actually had to do a lot of product type thinking and product type work, even if your role was not product manager. So yeah, maybe you're a developer, but if you can demonstrate that you were thinking about the business, you were thinking about user needs, you were making some real like prioritization decisions, then I think someone who has experience in technology can make a good case for moving into a product role. It might not be at the same level. You might have to start either at a junior level or like a mid-level potentially, but like as a director of PM, I definitely would look for relevant experience more than I would look for title, for example.
And if they don't have that experience, where can you get that experience from?
I would say it's either you start to build your career around it. So you start to say, okay, yeah, I'm an engineer, but I really want to be involved in product decisions as well. Like I want to join user tests. I want to understand what are the goals of what we're building. I want to be part of those conversations around prioritization. So for me as a PM, engineers who want to be involved in the product were always really, really valuable, right? Because I feel like that's, that balance of technical skill, technical knowledge, and also product thinking can, even if you just want to be an engineer, I think it makes you much, much stronger as an engineer. But also by having that experience, I think then you can bring it into a product role. Or of course, there is the path of going into a boot camp or doing some, an evening class or something like this can also help you pick up some of those skills. And I see more and more of these workshops now, or these classes, not just from like bigger coding schools, but actually like more and more freelance PMs who I know are now doing their own classes as well, because this is kind of like something scalable they can offer aside from just one-on-one client work. So there are lots of options if you want to pick up those skills.
And is there any resources in terms of like projects people can build experience if they're not able to build the experience within their own company?
I mean, I certainly think that if you end up, I'm not sure if this is answering your question, but I guess another way to do this is just start your own thing, right? Even if it's not like a full-time job, but if you build come up with a small idea you want to build, maybe it's an app, maybe it's a website. And I think as you launch that and build it and iterate on it, that's product experience, and that counts for a lot. So I think if you're applying for a PM job, even if you could say, look, I was never officially PM, but I did my own thing, and this is like, here's how I thought about it from a product perspective. This can also be super valuable. So
Yeah.
that's another
Perfect.
way.
Thank you for that answer. Another question from Jonathan. What are some of your strategies for bringing ideas, change to founders who typically believe that what they believe is always right or the right? This is both when you are working for founders in-house and also as a consultant.
Good question. I'll speak as a consultant first because that's my most recent experience. I try to lean a lot on like other resources, for example. So often if I suggest something, I might say, okay, here's 2 or 3 articles if you want to read about this further, right? To just kind of demonstrate this is not just like me telling you what I think. It's also like an industry standard in a way and like something other people are talking about. And this is where I lean a lot on like Silicon Valley Product Group, for example, because I definitely learned from them, like by reading the books and Marty Kagan's blog. And I end up applying those ideas a lot in my own work. And I also find that it's a pretty trusted resource. So when you send people an article or two from there, they tend to listen. But there are a lot of good product voices out there now on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Medium. So I would say, yeah, if your point is not enough to convince somebody, then looking for 2 or 3 articles or podcasts or something else to back it up, I think can really help. That's maybe my number 1 tip. And the second one is like, usually it's good to have examples. So I think it's something I'm still working on because often I'll just say like, okay, but this is how you should do it. And then people are like, well, yeah, but how do I know it works? Whatever. And then I try to give a few examples from what I've done to kind of substantiate why I think this is a good idea. Or counter examples, right? Kind of show, here's what might happen if you do it the other way around.
Perfect. Another question from Bhavik. What would you advise for a person who wants to start a career in consulting? I know there are different segments in the consulting industry. How should one determine which segment business is the right one for someone, at least for a start in the consulting business?
I mean, I'm not sure. So I didn't do that. I didn't make any kind of decision for myself. I think I really just put myself out there. I started taking what's coming. And then, like I said, I'm still in the process of trying to figure out what I like to do more or less. The most obvious and cliche but true thing is you need a network. Like every consulting job I've had so far has come from my network, pretty much, right? So that's really important to build up. And definitely, I think also a network of other consultants, because as I mentioned, like a lot of my work has come from somebody who was a consultant, left that field, and now the clients that come to them, they send to me. So I think just having that network of consultants where you can share jobs with each other is also just really valuable, a really good community to be part of.
Thank you for that answer. I love this question from Hugo. When you're working with multiple projects or clients at the same time, how do you balance your time between them all and invoice them appropriately too?
Yeah. I'm not great at this yet. So I've had some really burnout weeks because I just was kind of saying yes to everyone. And I think it's only actually in the last 2 weeks that I started to set some limits. I started to block off my mornings, for example, because I realized that but like one of the main reasons I went freelance is to also have a little bit more freedom in my life and like more control over my hours. And then I noticed that I was breaking a lot of those things by just saying yes to everything. So now I really try to block things off. And for example, if I have a day where I already have like 5 hours of calls, I will likely not take any more, even if I have the time in the day, unless somebody says, I really, really need you. Like we're at a critical point where I really need your help, right? I also try to be really sensitive to where the client is. And if I realize there's kind of an emergency or I'm blocking them, then I will try to make myself available. But if I see that there's some leeway, then I will at least within the week try to spread things out a bit more. So I think that's my best tip I can give is like start by establishing your own calendar, understand what your own well-being needs, what works for you, and then schedule around this. And it's okay to compromise, I think, a little bit, but not too much, because I've definitely noticed, I noticed after like 1 week of not observing this, I was completely drained. And it was the first time I had felt that drained since working full time. So for me, that was a wake up call that like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to start setting limits.
Wonderful advice, and it could be applied to all areas in your career.
One other thing I wanted to add, I think it's really important, is like be really transparent, be really clear, be really direct, but in a very kind way. I think people really respect that. If you want to say no, but do it in the right way. Like explain why. Like I've told a lot of my clients that like I am trying to have a good work-life balance. So sometimes I'm going to tell you no, and I'm going to explain why. And if you tell me it's an emergency, then I can override that potentially. But I think it's really good to be very open about that, so people don't feel like, okay, well, why is he pushing back for no reason? But they actually understand the reasoning and kind of sympathize.
My next question is: how did you build trust working full time as a product manager with your stakeholders, and now how do you build trust with your the people that you work with, contract with?
Yeah, good question. Full time, I think it's really about having a track record, right? So it's actually ideally you come in with a level of trust, right? Because these people interviewed you, they looked at your history, they hired you, so they're ideally they're starting with a certain level of trust. But I think you have this sort of so in Germany we have probation periods, which is like your first 6 months. Your contract is kind of more fluid. So basically it's a time that you evaluate the company, they evaluate you, and both parties can dissolve the contract very easily. Once you're past that 6 months, it's a lot harder to let someone go or to quit. And they're usually long notice periods in companies. So I kind of see, but I think it's kind of nice to have that in a way, because it reminds you that that first 6 months is for really like validating that trust they put into you by hiring you. And I think you can do this through again like a track record. So actually show what you can do and what you can deliver. Also through, again, really, I think honestly, like open, direct, honest communication is so important. But communication for PMs in general is important, right? Because all we do is communicate. We don't actually build anything or design anything. We just talk all the time, or write. So you have to be really good at that. And I find that you can accomplish that by being very open and direct. So if there are problems, be very open about them. Explain what's happening, why something's not working out. And just make yourself visible, but in the right way. Not by sort of just trying to shout over everybody, but just so people understand, what are you doing? What have you accomplished so far? What are you trying to accomplish next? Create as much visibility as possible. I think one of the things I always told my PMs that I managed was that don't wait for people to ask you what's going on. Because once they have to come to you and ask you, that already means there's not mistrust, but something's already missing. So predict this and communicate proactively about to the people who care, to the stakeholders that care about what you're doing. What are you doing? What have you achieved so far? What are the results? So they never have to come and ask you necessarily.
A wonderful answer. And then building trust with your current clients.
That's a good one. It's a little bit harder, to be honest, because there's often there's no results, right? Because most of it, I don't do any hands-on PM now, maybe a tiny bit, but for the most part, I'm just consulting. So I'm just kind of giving them feedback, or running workshops for them, or whatever it is. I don't know if I have a good answer. I think it's just, I'm still really focused on building strong relationships with them and being really open and honest, and also being honest when I can't help them with something. If a question comes up that I actually can't answer, I would much rather be like, hey, I don't know. I've never done this before. I don't have good advice, versus trying to make something up and make it seem like I know everything. But no, I don't have a good answer beyond that. I think I'm still learning a lot in this area.
I think that's a wonderful answer, just being clear and honest from the get-go is a great way to build trust initially as well. You had just mentioned that you, with your individuals that you worked with as a director of product management, you kind of coach them to kind of be predictive and make sure that they're doing things uh, before they happen. What other advice would you give the people that you work with?
So yeah, you mean sort of the people that are on my team or the people that I'm
Yeah.
leading?
And those who are just like starting out with in product management, like advice for them to level up.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. I mean, so proactive communication is huge. It's like, to be honest, it's the thing that I never really wanted to do when I was a PM myself, because it seems like overhead. It feels like, yeah, but let me just build the product. Like, let me just do the thing I'm actually hired to. I don't want to waste my time like sending lots of emails and updates. But at some point, you realize that that's not your only job. Like, communication is very much part of your job as well. And so being a good, proactive, clear communicator is super important. You have to make time for it. So that's number one. Number two, I think, is being protective of your time, because I think being a good PM requires time. You need time to like be able to think deeply, to talk to customers, to do a lot of things that are like kind of, I think, are less often seen as like productive work in a way, because they're not like, you're not generating something, for example. But I would always, or I would try to, and I think it's something I could have done better, but just challenge my PMs to actually make sure they have like enough time to do what they're doing well, because I think PMs have a tendency to just take everything on, and I think that's the flip side, is PMs should be protective of their time and make sure they have the time to do their job well. At the same time, I think good PMs are problem solvers who are willing to jump in and resolve something when it needs to, So I think some of the best PMs that I've worked with, like when they had to learn SQL and be able to write their own queries, they did this, not because they necessarily wanted to, but because there was no data person there and they realized that they needed data and they couldn't get it any other way. And so then they figured this out. So, yeah, I feel like there's so much more, but there's almost like too much. It's hard to pick where to start.
Well, thank you for that. And then my next question is what are the things that you currently love about your job? Any stories that you want to share, successful stories where you helped any startups?
I mean, what I really love the variety, because every company I'm working with right now is in a different industry, different type of business, different stage, and it's like, it's just so mentally activating to be working across these different things. And then also you eventually start noticing patterns and start noticing commonalities, even though people are working in very different areas. So I think this is super fun. I guess what's really satisfying is, just for example, recently I was working with a company, working with the founders and a few other people, and I think I facilitated 2 or 3 workshops for them. And by the end of that, they had like completely rethought what they were doing with their product, rethought their product strategy. I could kind of see they were having a bunch of light bulb moments, and I could see how eagerly they were taking on some of this way of thinking, and really quickly developing like their own product abilities. So this was really, really satisfying to me to see, like, I could just see how much it changed basically, and how much they were like, oh yeah, this makes so much sense. Like why didn't we think about it this way before? Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of the workshops and a lot of the consulting is changing that shifting to a product mindset. What resources do you recommend for those who are starting out to be able to um, think that way?
I mean, honestly, the best I can say is just find like 4 or 5 people who are writing about product and just like follow and read them a lot. So I already mentioned Silicon Valley Product Group is a really good resource. There are so many other people, so I don't think it's um, just. I mean, yeah. Basically, you want to kind of like learn. I think it's also nice to have a few people you follow consistently because you're getting this kind of consistent worldview about how they think about product. And there are going to be a lot of similarities, but there are also some differences. It's nice to see those discrepancies between them. That's probably the biggest advice I can give. Um, yeah.
And any resources for consulting or starting your own company?
For your own. I mean, I didn't really rely on resources for this. I relied on just trying it, and then also, I mean, the best one is find other product consultants and talk to them. Like I set up a bunch of informational interviews with people, and people are really eager to help. I think the product consulting world is not so big yet, so it doesn't feel competitive. So like 9 out of 10 people who I wrote, maybe they were busy and they said like, yeah, can we do this in a few weeks or in a month? But everybody was open to talking. And I got a lot of good perspectives, and then also started to build a network where, as I already mentioned a few times, then people started to refer other people to me. So that's the number one thing I would do. And it's also the advice I give when people were looking for work. Like usually my advice is, especially if you're transitioning into product or you want to take a big step or whatever, like do a bunch of informational interviews. If you write, my experience is when people reached out to me and they applied for a job, it was kind of easy to turn them down if I didn't think they were a good fit. But if people reached out and said, hey, could we just talk for 30 minutes? I want to learn more about what your company does. I'm almost never going to say no to that. It's just a matter of making sure I have the time. So that's a really good way to make kind of inroads within a company and learn more about them if you're not sort of super confident about applying there yet. And a great way to build relationships early on.
Yeah, wonderful advice. I think the beauty of product management, just the field, is everyone wants to help and they're looking forward to helping others. My next question is, and you kind of talked a little bit about it, but what are the skills that you think is important for somebody who's one, transitioning into product management? So product management, good skills for a product manager, and then the skills for a good consulting who's doing their own thing.
So for someone who's transitioning into product, I would assume that you're coming in either entry level or maybe mid-level max. So for me, the most important skills there are you have to have a good grasp of. So for me, the PMs, there's the three most important aspects, I guess, are customer thinking, technology, and business. You need to be able to balance all three of those. So just kind of checking where you are with all three aspects. I think most of the time PMs naturally lean towards one of those three, but you have to be pretty good at all three to do your job well. So I think that's really important. Then, as I already mentioned, just communication skills are really important, both written and verbal. And also, like within that, I think is balancing, like asking more questions than you answer in a way. So I think that's one of the things I learned early on is like, usually if someone comes to you for something, probably you should be asking more questions than talking, because usually the first thing they ask for is not the thing you're going to end up building. So you need to know how to get to the root of what is the problem they're really trying to solve, so that you can then solve that for them. Obviously, thinking about data is really important. Whether you don't necessarily have to have hands-on data skills, so you don't have to be able to write SQL queries or like manipulate data super well, but you need to be able to think and understand about data really well. And more, I see that this is like just an essential skill that a lot of people are lacking. I think at the same time, knowing how to talk to customers, knowing how to do user research, or at least again how to formulate those questions and how to interpret them, is a really important counterbalance. So basically, the quantitative and the qualitative sides are really important. And then maybe lastly, I would say problem-centered thinking. So like not being really attached to solutions. I think you want to be able to come up with really creative, interesting solutions, but you also need to be able to let them go as soon as you realize they're not the right ones, and really focus more on like, what is the real problem we're trying to solve and how do we iterate over solving it in the right way.
Yeah, I love that advice.
Yeah.
Uh, and then skills of a consultant.
I mean, as a consultant, I mean, as a PM in general, but definitely as a consultant, you need to be very just like personable and people oriented, right? Because you're going to be meeting a lot of different people. You need to have rapport with them. And usually if a client is reaching out to me, we have like a 30-minute call, right? It's not like you're going through a full interview process. So somehow in 30 minutes, you need to make a connection with them, show them that you know what you're doing, understand what problems they're having, and do this all pretty fast. I think facilitation is a really important skill. Actually, as a PM as well, I would say. It's something I never really focused on until the last few years, but I realized that if you know how to put together and run a really good workshop, this is like a huge advantage, actually, right? Again, both in-house and as a consultant, especially as a consultant, because like 50% of what I'm doing is running workshops for people. So I am actually considering getting some. I think I'm okay at this, but I might take some actual official training. But yeah, this is like I think an undervalued skill that not enough people have, and I think being a good facilitator is a major advantage in both jobs.
Perfect. And you had just mentioned asking the right questions, and is very important for both consulting and product management. How would somebody develop that skill?
So I mean, so I guess I'm lucky because I just in general I'm curious about almost everything, and so it's just by nature I will just, even if it's not part of my job, I will just ask lots of questions. I think if that's not your natural inclination, then you kind of have to just pay attention to yourself when you're talking, and you have to notice, okay, if you're talking for like more than 5-10 minutes at a time, you're probably not doing the right thing. You probably need to switch to like asking questions and probing more. As a PM, it's even more important because, like I said before, usually when people ask you for something, it's always like pretty surface level, and you need to be able to dig down to what's really underneath this. So just kind of asking yourself, did I understand, do I feel like I really understand what's underneath the thing that they're talking about, right? There's usually multiple layers you can peel off until you get to something really interesting.
Very nice. Very nice. And we're coming down to the last couple of minutes. Any general advice or any helpful advice that if you could give yourself when you first started out in product management, what advice would you give?
I think the biggest advice I would give myself is to learn more about the business side of things faster, because like I said, I came in with both zero knowledge of this and also like very little interest, and I had to kind of force myself to develop that part of the PM job. That's number one. I think number two, getting good at relationship building is really important. And then I think, again, like a lot of PMs maybe naively think that, yeah, as long as I just like do my job and I build the right features and I ship them, everything will be fine. But that's not the case. Like you really have to build relationship. You have to build trust. As a PM, you're going to be working with a lot of different people and a lot of different personalities. And you need to know how to work with all of those types of people, essentially. And that's something that's like, I think rarely kind of taught. And also I think it's hard to teach. It takes practice. You have to actually do it and learn. But that's really important.
Just a quick question with the business side. Do you think you would take a formal class? Would you do a degree?
I would not do a degree. Maybe a class would have like helped. I'm not sure what exactly would be like the one class I would have taken, but maybe financial modeling, maybe something around marketing, because I think it took me quite a while to kind of really understand marketing and how it works, because it's so different from product in a way. But I also, to be honest, there's so much information online. I'm not really sure you need to take or pay for classes these days in a lot of things. You know, to get advanced at something you do, because it really helps to have hand-on guidance and all of this. But when I'm talking about business, I'm really talking about more like on a foundational level understanding. And I think watch a bunch of YouTube videos, read a bunch of blogs. Just like remember that as a PM, I think the core of your job is to build the right things for your audience in order for the business to be successful. So that's how you're connecting things, right? So if you want to do that, you need to understand what is it for the business to be successful. You know, what are the biggest business problems you're trying to solve right now, and how do you line up your product decisions with those business problems? Because I've seen a lot of PMs, including myself, build a bunch of product stuff that they thought was good for customers, but actually had zero impact on the business because that's not where the problem was. So you really need to know how to align those things and do the right thing at the right time for the company, for the business.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's wonderful to end on that note of being able to juggle everything, not just lean on one certain aspect of the product cycle. Any
Yeah.
other tips before we end?
No, I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we've included your LinkedIn website so that people with any other questions can reach you. Thank you so much, Ilya.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.